Thank you. We're going to switch it up.
Yeah, we're switching today where I'm going to be moderating.
Yeah.
Okay. So up here, what we wanted to do for the panel was we wanted to bring basically a point of view from each of the areas. Myself building technology for the thing, Justin from the investment side, Jonathan from the creative agency side, and then our favorite, finance and accounting. I'll let everybody do their intros. My name's Tomás Puig. I'm the CEO and founder at Alembic. You know, the whole goal of my company is to turn marketers into storytellers again. But the way we do that is we use AI to actually do advanced attribution, and we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. And we've been wanting to bring back in Justin.
Yes, so venture investor. We led the last rounds of Alembic's company and partner Jeffries over there in the back. So yeah, grateful to be here.
Jonathan, I think probably perfectly suited for this conversation because at Gray we believe in famously effective, which is literally bridging the gap between creativity and effectiveness every day.
Chris, not only am I that finance and accounting guy, but I'm also private equity, as well as global AI ecosystem, EY.
So we're going to start with a simple question, right, that can have a number of answers. And what I wanted to ask you all is, what is the last thing you heard a CMO complain about measurement? And I think we'll start with Chris and go this way.
Oh, I don't know where 90% of my activities, my, analysis paralysis, 90% of their time is spent in analysis paralysis. They don't have a strong signal and it's just dragging down the organization. They're having trouble supporting the organization to their CMO, to their CFO. I mean, that number, and that's a publicly stated number, that 90% analysis paralysis, that's what I hear time and time again. Little output from all the effort going in.
I think the one I hear a lot, particularly with new clients, is we don't know what we're measuring. It's a sort of a build on what you're saying, is they don't have the clear, what is that metric that actually needs to move to drive the business, to drive the growth. So identifying that becomes job one.
So we've met over the years a lot of different technology to help measure performance and programmatic. When we talk to CMOs, many times telling us that's great, but now I feel like I'm missing out on the brand side, right? We've moved so far one way where we've lost what really Cannes all about, which is telling stories and being creative. So the advancements there in your business and what we're doing is so exciting because it helps creatives move back to what they want to do best.
Yeah, I'd say actually it was just with a CMO before this, right? A global CMO. And what they told us was, I have a good handle on about 60% of what I'm doing, right? We're able to track it, logged in users, or things that are very clear. About 20%, I can kind of guess. And the other 20%, I have absolutely no idea. And how do you actually make more clarity in the unknown? Because unfortunately, the unknown tends to be the stuff that hits net new customers the most. And I think that that's a really deep struggle that a lot of people are feeling right now. So, this is meant to be, we did a general session yesterday. This is meant to be much more of a technical conversation about the problems and things we're actually having. And one of the things I wanted to ask, which was the next thing, which I'll leave this to any one of you can grab it. If you could choose one thing to measure, right? One channel, one thing that you've just wished it could be measured to absolute perfection, which one would you choose?
I would say sponsorships, because everyone knows being associated with a sport, being associated with some other type of brand has inherent value. We all experience it as consumers, but that's one of the hardest areas to measure, right? With TV, we've had Nielsen ratings, which at least shows some level of measurement, not all the way to sales. Social, we have a lot of data, but sponsorships, you think about the most emotional moments. My team, the Florida Panthers, they won a few hours ago in the middle of the night. I have such a strong affiliation and love of that of that team. And to have brand moments around that, that's, associate that brands with that team. But
It's also
very hard
really
to measure.
expensive.
Yeah, that as well.
So, Tomás, I almost think that the theme of this talk, right, bridging the gap between creative and measurement, is like the wrong debate.
Ooh, I like this. Get spicy.
Like in private equity, look at the finance guy, accounting guy getting spicy, Tomás.
Come on, go for it.
It is the wrong debate because in private equity, right, we look for value creation. Think about it, value creation. And so it almost like creates a false narrative, right? We don't have time in private equity to look at them separately, right? Measurement and creativity.
You have one measurement, the dollar.
You said it.
It's a really interesting question because if they're going to talk technology, I've got a little technology bugbear, which is we currently measure behavioral and attitudinal shifts through structures and models that are about 50 to 60 years old. It's a survey. It's what did you think of this?
For the nerds in the audience, linear regression.
Right. And it frankly is flawed because it comes with inherent bias. It comes with people responding the way they think they should respond, not what they are actually doing, what they're actually responding. So if I asked all of you AI nerds to get me anything, it would be get me a better way to understand what's going on inside the heads of my consumers when they're actually the mental capacity, how they're connecting to the work. Because you connect to creativity in a visceral level. It's not a tangible, measurable on a scale of 1 to 5. How did you feel about this?
So you want emotional brainwaves?
I do.
Oh.
I want everybody wired, and I want to get into everybody's head.
Is this
That's
like
all.
the Matrix?
If,
I don't know how well that worked
if
out.
that's what it takes, then I'll do it.
I'd say, what is the one thing I wish I could measure? I'd say the hardest thing to measure right now, like just from a technological basis, I would actually say that it would actually be word of mouth.
Why is that?
And one of the because you can actually get a direct signal or an indirect signal from a lot of things. But word of mouth, right? You can basically guess an equation. You can do everything else. It's the most important thing. But oftentimes word of mouth is just synonymous with brand, but it's not the same. Just because you like a brand doesn't mean you're going to tell somebody about it. It doesn't have the enthusiasm. So if you talk about brand, word of mouth is like the amount of enthusiasm that encourages to spread it, right? And so that would be the most interesting thing that you could do from a basis. We've tried a couple studies with that, even with our tech, and I think that we might eventually get there, but it is also what we call a N of N problem. One thing connected to one thing just expands exponentially, right? As problem set.
You're talking about word of mouth as its own singular motion, but how does it parlay with all the other actions you're doing around that?
Hence why it's the hardest thing to do.
Well,
But
you have to overlay it with brand sentiment. You have to overlay it with volume, trajectory. You have to overlay it with where it's going on. We sort of try to triangulate that through 3 metrics, right? What's being shared socially, right? But that's still a relatively valid indirect metric. We look at the sentiment of what's being shared. And thanks to the wonderful AI tools, that's a hell of a lot easier than it used to be when I first started, where we had to.
I'd still say all sentiment algorithms are a lie, but yes.
It's not. I'm not looking to pull. It's you're pulling out the keywords and the sort of the broad strokes that are going on. And then the third is, unfortunately, we have to rely on an age-old survey and ask people what other people are hearing, right?
Very hard with small brands, though, right? Because
Very
people
hard
have
for
heard
small brands, yeah. But but this is the problem. So much of what we want to measure, we have to do in an indirect way, and then connect the dots between potentially 3 correlating facts to hopefully make sure they turn into a causational relationship.
Yeah, I mean, what we do at Alembic is we actually use causal math that was developed during the pandemic, right? And so a lot of people think mRNA is the only thing to come out of the pandemic from a technology basis. The other thing to come out of it was a lot of incredible mathematics. So I woke up one morning and I was like, everybody here remember contact tracing? right? We had to write his name down. It was like, mathematically, what is the difference between a contact trace and a marketing touch? Like, actually, not much. So that throughout that time, they started doing these huge simulations where we were tracking and figuring out. But it was the first time we had a real life situation where we could actually see whether it worked, right? And taking all those signals, doing all those things, we can then start to tease out this stuff on a causal basis rather than a correlative. But the amount of horsepower, going back to what you're saying, like nuclear, weather, disease, drug discovery, they all have these supercomputers and this advanced stuff. So why are we all using math from the 1970s?
Yep.
I mean, the problem with, I'd say probably 90 to 95% of marketing math is based off linear regression.
It's antiquated.
Yeah, well, linear regression can't see individual events and the time between those events mathematically, which means if you're ever curious about, like, this specific thing, did it lead to these other things? You can't get that specific. It's not possible. You do general channels, everything else. Now, I want to posit something for the three of you. The way the world used to work is that whenever you're talking to your modeling team or your science team or whatever else, they would say, hey, you need to reduce the number of things in this model. We call it reduced dimensionality, right? Reduce the number of things in the model, because if you have too many things, it can actually do what we call overfitting. It can almost believe its own stuff and basically falsely tell you what's true. And that was maybe a few hundred years that was the case, a couple hundred years that was the case. Nowadays, when you're seeing the more data you feed a model, the more accurate it gets. So this is only within the last couple of years that this monstrous change in how we deal with data and how we think about modeling data and accuracy has gone. But a lot of people aren't prepared for even just switching to that. So have you all talked about it anywhere, seen the issue, or have you all considered what you're going to do about it? And from your side, we'll go this way, but what are you thinking about from an investment thesis? So, Chris.
So clearly, this is a huge shift, right? We need the ability. So the LLMs, they've gone out and sucked up everything that's out there. From our vantage point, we're very interested in understanding what assets do we have, what proprietary assets do we have, what do we need to augment to bring in intelligence that can be, more of a broader, complete picture, just complete signal. And increasingly, me personally, being around the technologies, I'm really interested in, as we start to trust, figure out security and privacy, which, by the way, Tomás, I know that your company's really focused on, how can we feed more into the intelligence creation and get more and more insights rather than just patterns and insights, but actually get signals around causality, et cetera. That's what I'm really excited about.
People really confuse the difference between measurement and intelligence all the time, right? They're not the same thing.
They're not. I'm going to, you use the word insight. I would argue that any data set is never going to give you a piece of insight. It's going to give you a fact. It's going to give you a truth. The insight comes with what you do with that. And that is ultimately the unmeasurable factor. When you talk about the AI learning and the AI getting smarter and taking on more, it's still always backward facing. True creativity takes a leap into the unknown, and that is unmeasurable. And it goes to your, the startup, the valuation, right? When lightning is in a bottle, the creative, the idea is right, it takes off. And I hope we never get to the point where AI is telling us that's a good creative idea, because it will always be based on what's happened before, not on something that is unique or new. And if you look at the work that's winning, it's all work that you go, oh, I've not seen that before, right? And that is an intangible you can't. No AI can deal with that or measure that.
So there's a phrase, it's never easy. It's never been easier to start a company. And in some ways, I think that's true. For one, it's easier to find co-founders. There's platforms to do that. There's a lot of resources from pre-seed on. There's applications now with Cursor and others to start building your product.
Vibe coding. In other ways, I think it's harder than before to start a company. It's way more competitive. And if you want real technical moats, you're going to have to spend on training and
real AI. And that is a barrier that I think makes it difficult for new startups without the resources to really be able to do, because the bar has never been higher now in organizations, because both big tech and mid-sized technology, unicorn companies to startups have those lower barriers to get something out there. So I think in many ways it's more difficult to break through the noise if you're a startup in the space.
One of the most famous calls I ever made to Justin was, "Hey, Justin, what are you doing?" "Oh, nothing. I would like to buy a supercomputer." Pause. They're not cheap.
Where does one buy a supercomputer? That's a great...
There's only one place.
One guy.
Mr. Jensen.
But for many startups, that's a non-starter. And we made a big risk and bet to do that would pay off. And it has, given the scale of Delta and Mars and others that you're working with. But for many startups, they don't have even the opportunity to buy that, even at the millions that it costs.
Yeah, no, I mean, Jensen's been very good to us over the years. And I think, him really believing in this new methodology of measurement. What I was going to say on this front, we were talking about LLMs and creative. As a math person, I do not believe LLMs will ever get there for the mathematical reasons. LLMs predict the next best token, right? You can prompt it, you can push it. It's pre-trained on data that came before. But what it's always going to give you is the median best answer. So please explain to me what marketer wakes up in the morning and goes, "You know what I want to be? The median." Right? You want to be the LeBron James, the 0.1%, right? You have to, a marginal increase in performance above that is going to be everything. But so why are you going to use tech that's going to basically do it? Now, for cataloging, that type of stuff, it's fine, right? But
well, this goes to the urgent versus the important, right? And the AI is going to help us take care of the urgent tasks, the things that suck up our time.
The soul-sucking tasks.
The soul-sucking that raises a bar that allows us to do the important, which in the creative industry and for marketers is, how do we get to the creative idea? What's the original thought? What's the leap we're going to make? And if we're not using the technology to take away all that other stuff so we can focus, basically the human capital becomes more important again.
And private equity here again, the median.
So I'm Star Trek, he's Blade Runner.
We're looking for creative excellence, right? So the creative excellence with the value creation is going to give you the multiples. It's going to give you the lift. And so going back to, this whole creative, bridging the gap to quantitative, it is that creative excellence that ultimately is going to distinguish you from the company, the outfit, the capability next door.
I'd say, this is an old interesting thing where people are like, most products in the universe are commoditized in some way. And when I mean commoditized, it's like you buy gasoline. There's BP and there's Shell, right? You're buying a phone. There's Android and there's iPhone. There's choices. And, when I was doing economics, I was doing a lot of economics of attention and everything. And I used to say that, only three things can separate a commoditized product: brand, service, or price. Which one of those is probably the most expensive? Probably service, right? It takes real humans, a real build, or you have to improve the product. Brand can separate out things that are very, very similar. Say, like, let's be honest, like soft drinks.
I would argue it costs more to build the brand than it does to deliver the customer service. The time, the amount of money you need to spend to build that headspace with consumers or customers is quite important.
I'd say
so. I'd like to see the data on that, and we could have a market.
Interestingly enough, I would say you might be right, but I think it would depend by the product, right? So some of them you might be really, really expensive for service, right? And some might be cheaper to do brand, And so I think it probably depends on distribution.
There's an awful lot of products and services that don't require much customer service.
True. I think about when we talk about service, we also include form, factor, and design, usually. So like how serviceable it is.
Right.
Oh, see, but this is what's very interesting. At what point do we separate out the actual product itself from brand?
You can't. The product, how it looks, how it feels, you interact with it, what you do with it, what we tell you as marketers you should be thinking about it, that is all brand. Brand is a collection of inputs.
So the engineering department is now in the brand department.
They should be.
Ooh, I like this.
In one of my previous lives, I worked with some engineers, and I would have these knockdown fights over what the importance of brand and how what they were doing with their product development and capability was as important to brand development as any ad that I could create for them.
All right, Justin, do you think when
They didn't understand that, though.
when you're developing and looking at startups, right? You see hundreds of startups, thousands of startups. Do you consider when they have a brand or not, right? The strength of that brand, and do you actually consider the product part of that brand or not?
No, because they're startups. They're just beginning. They're just getting their first customers. They don't have that reputation yet, right? So our belief is that very high quality products that can deliver will build that brand and reputation over time, but we're getting to them at the beginning of their journey, so they haven't developed it yet.
So at what point do we say you hit the curvature of where what you're saying, Jonathan, right? At what point in a company's life is that true, right? Like, does it get there?
I would argue that, I mean, you said you grow it over time. You should be starting day one. Because the mistakes you make at the beginning of a product development process turn into bigger issues when they become a brand.
So then how do you measure that as brand? Because we're talking about brand versus measurement here, right? We're getting off the reservation here. We're saying the product is the brand. But at some point it must be married.
In a lot of cases, the product experience is the brand, yeah, or is a critical component.
But I'm saying think about how complex this is. Because we're now veering into the land of product. We're saying maybe engineering should be part of brand. How the heck do you measure that when that's actually part of your cost of goods sold? Chris.
I would just say that EY just launched Studio Plus, which is like consolidating 37 acquisitions throughout many years. We can advise on this very topic around customer experience, product launches. That's what I'd say to that debate.
I can give you an example, I think, a very, very simple example from, I think, one of your clients from Delta.
Yeah.
When they rebuilt their app, their boarding pass on the app was 2 swipes before they redid it. And that was a fundamental pain point in the overall product experience, to the point that people complained about it. Because they would get up to the line and there'd be people ahead of them having to swipe twice, I can't find it, right? They fixed that. Their net promoter scores went through the roof. Their overall experiential, everything went up. And that was just one small facet of a product experience impacting their people's overall belief about the brand.
So we do this with gotcha games.
So I don't know how to quantify that in your sense, but that is how important it is.
So we actually do quantify this stuff. It's actually pretty interesting. So we work with gotcha games. Think like Monopoly Go, Pokemon Go, you have energy, right? The design of the game itself is deeply important to the monetization, right? They're built as some of the most complex human feedback loops in existence. At the same time, you're doing massive amounts of marketing. And so what we do is we bring the fabric of both. We look at every single time you change the product, because we do treat the product changes as marketing, because you're promoting in product, being like, do this new mini game, do this new whatever. And we have to look at the interactions across all the things for both the external marketing and the internal marketing, find all the causal connections to get down to the revenue lift. But we find often that there can be completely unintended consequences. So you can actually change promotion. Where we saw this first was we worked with a...
That's because humans are involved.
Yeah, so we worked with a huge physical business where you'd walk in and order drinks of some type. And we were bringing in billions of rows of transaction data, and they were spending, mid 8 figures on marketing, and they could not lift anything. It was just like dead. And we're like, what the heck is going on here? So we install our stuff, bring in all this data, do the whole modeling, and we're like, well, sorry, you're right. We're like, okay, what do we do now? So then we started bringing in other stuff. We brought in foot traffic. We brought in the digital ordering system, how long things took to fulfill. We brought in like literally everything we could think of. And what we found was the most fascinating unintended consequence. Just like you were saying about the double swipe, they were actually doing a great job with marketing. It was driving tons of foot traffic. They were denial of service attacking their own business. Because what happened is digital orders would lift the exact same time as foot traffic. So you would walk in the door, a ton of digital orders would hit, but they would fulfill orders in the exact way they were received. So digital orders would pile up against all the people who are standing in line, and no one wanted to wait 30 minutes for a drink. And so they were actually, marketing was working, right? Brand was working. It was driving people there. It was delivery failure. And so finding those things is hard.
So that goes to, I think, one of the most fundamental things we forget as the marketers often forget, is that at the beginning of any process, when a CMO briefs us, if we don't understand what the problem is that's actually behind their growth objective or what they're trying to achieve, exactly that,
Yeah, we
There we-
jokingly say we actually surface the problems because you can't know them.
We have to, if we don't identify that, I call it the underlying problem, and it's usually behavioral. It can be cultural, it can be categorical, but if you don't identify that, you don't know what you're solving for, and therefore, as a marketer in creativity, you don't know what you need to move and change, which brings you back to the first question you asked. Not enough CMOs understand the problem behind their business challenge. They're just, I've got to drive more sales. They don't understand why they're not driving those sales right now.
Yeah, I'd say when you have infinite amounts of data, right, and depth, no human could ever know all of it. The way I tell this, people like, oh, no, I know my data pretty well. And I go, okay, tell me every single file that exists on your laptop. I'm waiting. You can't, right? You never know what's actually there. And so the key here is that what systems have to do now is we actually have to mine all of the data, and then we actually have to surface out what the problems are. You can't actually know them yourself. It's like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, if anyone likes it. They build this whole, like the whole joke is that, I'm going to ruin people if you haven't read a book from 30 years ago, but the whole joke is they want to know the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, right? That's supposed to be the thing. And they get to the end and they go,
42.
and then they go, wait, what's the
6 times
question?
8.
Right? And they're like, what's the question? Well, that's the problem with marketing, right? You have to surface all of the things like you're talking about. Then you can start answering them. But we try to do in the inverse, right? Where you make a supposed suggestion on what the problem is. But that's like kind of playing whack-a-mole almost. I don't know. What do you think, Justin?
I think we're out of time.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.